challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Samueli. It is now time for the Thursday evening live stream. And as you can see, I'm back in Budapest. The excursion in Belgrade is over, and I'm back in grim, dark, sunless Budapest. But welcome everybody who has joined me. And somebody says, "Great, George. Thanks for sharing your speech in Belgrade. Great speech." Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate that. That's Ahmadovich Nash. So thank you so much. So a few things I want to get to today. I mean, obviously, as far as the war in Iran is concerned, I mean, it's as you were. The key is whether Iran will be able to continue without collapsing. I mean, they obviously they have no hope of military victory over the United States and Israel. What they need to be able to do is to inflict pain to on the United States, obviously, on Israel, obviously, and to inflict pain on the global economy. Um, the United States should not ever be allowed to simply walk away from this, because that may well be the advice that Trump will be receiving in the coming days. You know, hey, this is the sort of the facile kind of realpolitik. Hey, why don't you just declare victory and go home? And I think that will obviously be tempting for Trump, because Trump will say, "Well, we kind of destroyed their nuclear capabilities. We knocked out all their launchers. We knocked out all their ballistic missiles, and we hit their IRGC, and all their commanders are dead, and their political leaders are dead. And so we've accomplished what we wanted. So we're just going to call it a day." Now, I don't think Iran's leaders are going to accept that. And I think they can't accept it, because if they did, they would essentially be inviting the next round of attacks, just like after last June. It was 8 months before they were subjected to yet another attack. So in this case, I think it'll be wait for 6 months before they can be subjected to another attack. So Iran cannot accept a unilateral decision by the United States to call it a day and say, "Well, that's it. Now it's over." So that's it. So I think that if Trump does do that, and if Trump does put out feelers to Tehran to say, "I'm ready to call it off. I hope you are ready to call it off as well," then Iran, I think, will say, "No, we're not ready to call it off. You can call it off if you want, but we're not going to do that. We will continue hitting targets in Israel. We will continue hitting targets in the Gulf, because we cannot be sitting ducks for another attack in just a few months' time. And we're not going to start negotiating and all this nonsense, because we've already been burned twice by recent negotiations with the Trump administration. And of course, we were burned by signing the JCPOA. So we're just not going to do that. Now, that of course is a high risk strategy for Iran, because if their air defense systems have largely been knocked out, and if their ballistic missile capabilities have been extensively degraded, we don't yet know about that, but we have to assume that they have suffered some considerable degradation. Then yes, the United States would be able to just keep attacking Iran at will, and just hitting targets. Basically just be target practice. Now, the question then is, would the United States be able to do that? And I have to say, I doubt it. We can see that this attack on the school is on the very first day. So that's February the 28th. So already almost 2 weeks have elapsed, that's not going away, and that's causing a lot of anguish um, in the United States, but elsewhere. Hey, you killed all these little children. I mean, this isn't the IRGC. These aren't ayatollahs. These are just little Persian children that you've killed, and just simply saying, "Oh well, these things happen in war. This is collateral damage, accidents, and whatever." And basically, you've killed innocents, and there's no excuse for that. So that's going to be very difficult, and particularly if there are going to be more and more of these kinds of hits, which is what you would get if it becomes a turkey shoot. And there's no reason why Iran's leaders would surrender. Why would they? What's in it for them? Um, Basically just handing over Iran to foreign occupiers. That doesn't sound very enticing. Surrendering power, that doesn't sound enticing. Um, and, um, and essentially just simply negotiating the terms of the next attack. So, therefore, I don't think they will surrender, in which case the United States can just keep attacking. But public support for that will evaporate very, very quickly. And in fact, it was just it's not going to be it's just not sustainable. People do not like bombing of essentially civilian targets, because if as Trump has said, we've pretty much knocked out all their military targets, then all that's left is to keep hitting the civilian targets, and therefore that there's not going to be any support for that. So I think as long as there's no collapse, and I don't think there will be collapse, I think the government is now has reasonably consolidated itself. There hasn't really been any kinds of uprisings. The the dream of Netanyahu that the people are going to come out in the streets against the Ayatollahs, that hasn't happened. It's not going to happen. So there's no reason to surrender, and therefore Trump will be in a problem. Will have a real problem on his hands. He can demand unconditional surrender for all he wants. He's not going to get it without military occupation of Iran, and that's a huge, huge headache. It's a huge country, 93 million. It's massive landmass. The U.S. just doesn't have the resources for something like that. Now, I know there's all the talk about that. We can send in the ground troops. That is a huge, huge, costly endeavor, and I mean, the U.S. would suffer enormous casualties in any kind of ground invasion. Even something more limited like seizing Karg Island, and there's a lot of talk about that. Well, if we can seize Karg Island, we're going to destroy their oil industry and whatever. That in itself is a very, very difficult undertaking, and that's largely because the nature of war has indeed changed. And Iran is abundantly supplied with drones, and they can hit U.S. forces with drones. As soon as you have a large land force being formed for a ground invasion, they're just sitting ducks. And these drones, I mean, there's an abundance of them. They would just hit and destroy the ground forces. And the United States would then start suffering very serious casualties. Yes, in theory, the United States can put together an army that can invade Iran, but it would suffer enormous casualties. And ultimately, the United States would probably have to reintroduce the draft. They would just simply, the numbers are not there to sustain a large scale invasion. I mean, you're going to have to introduce conscription, as I think Russia has found. They just don't have the numbers to win that war. I mean, if you want to win that war, you need to introduce mass mobilization. You need millions of men under arms so that you can sustain casualties and be able to push through your infantry to seize key pieces of key strategic targets. Otherwise, you're just taking a square inch here and a square inch there, and liable to be pushed back anytime your adversary wants. So I think that's the way it's heading. I don't think there's going to be any negotiations. I don't think there's going to be a surrender. In which case, Trump can either think in terms of a ground invasion with the proviso that down the road, if the ground invasion fails, then he would have to think about introducing conscription. Horrible, very unpopular move. Nobody wants that. Or he's going to have to make concessions. And I think Iran will drive a hard bargain. I think Iran will say, well, we want, at the very least, a guarantee that you don't attack again. I mean, there's talks about security guarantees, but I don't know who would exactly provide Iran with security guarantees. Russia and China are not going to provide security guarantees. They're just not going to do it. Russia and China do not want to get into a war with the United States, so they're not going to provide security guarantees. So the only real issue is, is that they would have to sign some kind of a non-aggression treaty with the United States and Israel. I don't know whether Israel would agree to that. I can see the United States saying, agreeing to a non-aggression treaty, but Israel won't sign that. And if Israel doesn't sign that, then I don't think there's a deal, because Iran just doesn't want to go down this path. The other issues, and this was even raised. Iran has raised this before, but it was raised today by Khamenei in his the statement that was issued on his behalf of compensation, and that they want compensation from the United States. Now, very unlikely the United States would offer any compensation. The United States never does. I mean, it never offers any compensation for all the destruction that it wreaks. But it's an unfreezing of Iran's assets that might be doable. So that's I think that's within Trump's control to unfreeze those assets. So that could happen. But at this stage, the United States is going to have to make concessions, because just calling it a day, Iran isn't going to accept that. And I think Trump is starting to realize that magic wand of saying, "Hey, declare victory and go home," that isn't an option for him. Apart from anything else, as I say, it's not acceptable to Iran. Iran won't accept it, but Israel won't accept it either, because Israel will say, "Hey, we haven't achieved anything. The Ayatollahs are still in power. There's still a guy by the name of Khamenei who is the country's chief cleric. Well, we haven't achieved anything. We haven't achieved regime change. We haven't removed the Ayatollahs. We haven't destroyed Iran. Iran is still a huge state. It's a big country. We were hoping to just destroy the regime and destroy the country. So basically there'll be nothing left of Iran. This isn't what we were planning on. So they're not going to allow Trump just to walk away. And they're making it clear. You see all the Twitter accounts in which there are all these threats against Trump. You're doing, Mr. President, you're doing fantastically well, great, great. But now is not the time to go wobbly. Now is not the time to, leave a job half done. And there's Mark Levin talking about, he wants to kill Khamenei, the new Khamenei. He wants to kill him, I'm sure Trump is getting the same nonsense from the Israelis. So we got to kill Khamenei, got to kill some more leaders. But in fact, they haven't been able to kill, as far as we know, they haven't succeeded in killing any more leaders. So the Iranians have now learned to adapt, and their key figures have gone into hiding. So it's clearly they're not. It's not it's not proving to be quite so easy to pick off the leaders. So today, when the statement was read out on behalf of Khamenei, we had this idiot on CNN, but maybe at other networks, saying, "Well, Khamenei hasn't really met the minimum burden of demonstrating that he's still alive, or demonstrating that there's a leadership that's viable." So there's no reason to believe that he's alive. No reason to believe that he wrote the statement. Well, I don't know whether there's a reason or there isn't a reason. Khamenei has very good reason to worry about his security. Israel has already said they're going to kill him. I mean, they've said they will kill anybody who becomes the leader of Iran. I mean, that's Israel has already said that, which means the United States is in on it as well. So therefore, if you're Khamenei, you are expecting to be assassinated. So therefore, you're going to take whatever precautions you can to avoid assassination. So you're not going to just simply go on television and and make a statement. I mean, one would have thought that was fairly obvious, given the circumstances and the sort of the mass executions that Israel has conducted, that Iran's leaders are going to make themselves scarce. They're not going to be sitting ducks, sitting in a TV studio, issuing speeches. You would have thought this idiots at CNN. It's kind of a redundancy, idiot and CNN. So it's like there's no reason to to use both words. But what I thought was very amusing is that there's never really any demand for transparency or physical manifestations when it comes to others who are supposedly targeted by Russia. So, for instance, the Skripals disappeared from view in 2018. So that's 8 years ago. It's now 8 years since the alleged assassination attempt on the Skripals, and no one has seen hide or hair of the Skripals. And CNN doesn't demand that they appear. CNN doesn't demand. I think we should interview the Skripals. They might have an interesting story to tell. I mean, they were the victims of this extraordinary assassination attempt by the Kremlin. It'd be kind of interesting to interview them. How it happened, how do they feel, and whatever. And yet, no, boom, that's it. They've disappeared, and no one can reach them. No one can no one can interview them. No one can communicate with them. No communication at all. None. Not even emails or anything. They can't conduct an interview even with voice and face distortion technology. No, none of that. That's in the various legal proceedings. No, they can't testify. Even remotely, as I say, with distortion, whatever. Nope, can't do it. And no one asked any questions. Well, because the Russians are just so fiendish, so we can't do any, in any way threaten their lives. So that's with the Skripals, and yet they expect Khamenei to appear on television and just be a sitting target for Israel. Anyway, I want to now talk a little bit about yesterday's UN Security Council resolution. So, as you know, yesterday there was the first time that the UN Security Council adopted a resolution on Iran. I mean, there'd been a UN Security Council debate earlier in the first days of the U.S.-Israeli attack, but there hasn't been a resolution until yesterday. And the resolution that was adopted essentially condemned Iran for attacking the Gulf states. The resolution was sponsored by a number of the Gulf states, including Bahrain. And there was nothing in the resolution condemning the attack on Iran, nothing. So the only country condemned in this resolution was Iran. Now, 13 members of the UN Security Council voted in favor of this resolution, as I say, condemning Iran for its attacks on the Gulf states. And so you may ask, oh, well, but what about Russia? Russia and China, what did they do? Did they support this resolution? Well, no, they didn't support the resolution. They abstained. Apparently, they didn't have anything to say on the matter, just abstained. So the resolution was adopted. Now, this is quite a remarkable thing because, after all, we've all been led to believe that Russia, China, and Iran, North Korea, they're all part of this global axis of resistance, resisting the US-led hegemony, a kind of a Western global order. But somebody obviously had forgotten to mention this to Russia and China because they abstained. Their great ally, Iran, which is also a member of BRICS, was apparently allowed to just get condemned by the UN Security Council. So Russia and China abstained. Now, of course, it all kind of reminds one of the Libya resolution. Remember Libya in 2011, the UN Security Council adopted a resolution not authorizing the use of force against Libya, but authorizing a no-fly zone in Libya. Now, of course, NATO interpreted that as the green light to bomb Libya. And when Russia abstained, Putin at the time, Putin was prime minister at the time. Remember, that was when they did that this was 2011, they did that swap with Medvedev. So he was prime minister at the time. So Medvedev was president, and Putin seemed to be very critical of that Russian decision. That basically you abstain, and by abstaining, you effectively authorized the NATO attack on Libya. Now, there are people who say, well, what does it matter? It's a UN Security Council. I mean, who cares about the UN? What does it matter? Well, there's certain problems with that argument. I mean, first of all, Russia and China purport to care very much about the United Nations. That's not, that's different from the United States. The United States detests the United Nations. It always has detested it. It goes along with it because the United States was one of the founders of the United Nations, but it's always detested and despised it. But that's not the case with Russia. Russia, in its public diplomacy, goes out of its way to extol the virtues of the United Nations. You know, that it respects national sovereignty. The basic sovereign equality of all nation states of the world. You know, it's the upholder of international law. So Russia does care very much about the United Nations, and for years and years it's been saying, well, we need to go get back to the UN Charter. You know, the principles of the UN Charter must govern relations among states. This is Russia's position. That's not the position of the United States, not the position of Israel. The Europeans are kind of, somewhere in between. But the United States absolutely detests United Nations. So to say, oh, well, who cares what the United Nations says because it's so ineffective? That's not a convincing argument, because Russia does care very much about the United Nations. Now, the second point is the resolutions of the United Nations do have an effect. They have an enormous public resonance. If somebody says, well, the UN Security Council decided this, and then you say the UN Security Council unanimously decided this, because it was unanimous, 13 votes in favor, 2 abstentions. So you can say it was unanimous. That's the argument that was used in the case of Libya. The United Nations Security Council unanimously decided to attack Libya. That wasn't quite what the resolution said, but it didn't matter, because you had the authority of the UN Security Council. So, but when you adopt a resolution, that has an effect. That provides a justification for anything the United States and Israel decide to do. Hey, we just got the UN Security Council saying that Iran is acting, horrifically. That's not me saying it. Trump will say, that's not me, that's the UN Security Council. And so that it has indeed a great deal of force if it comes with the imprimatur of the UN Security Council. And then there are legal consequences of that, because if the UN Security Council has determined that, and that's more or less what goes for international law, then that you can justify all sorts of things that you're going to do to Iran. Hey, look, the UN Security Council resolution has said this. They're acting illegally. They're acting in violation of international norms. So we can do all sorts of things to Iran, whether we can attack Iran at will. Because, look what the UN Security Council just said. So we can attack them at will. We can bomb them at will. UN Security Council. And of course, you can also seize their property, seize all their assets. UN Security Council. I said that they're the ones who've been doing all this damage. So we can seize all their assets because we've got the UN Security Council behind us. So when you adopt that resolution, that has resonance. That's not something that you can just simply ignore. As Iran found to its cost when it was subjected to very serious UN Security Council sanctions, also approved of by Russia, its great ally, for years and years over its nuclear program, until the JCPOA, when the sanctions were lifted. So this justifies sanctions. This justifies attacks on Iran. This justifies the seizure of assets. And Russia and China were abstained. So let's first of all take a look at this resolution as to what it was. Now, before we look at that, Russia presented its own draft resolution. So this was the resolution that was adopted. Russia abstained, but Russia also presented its own draft resolution, which, needless to say, was rejected. I mean, what would you expect to happen? Yeah, the resolution presented by Russia was rejected. So here is here's the actual resolution that was adopted, and then we'll take a look at the Russian draft resolution. And so this is a resolution 2817. And it says the Security Council, having considered the later from 28, blah, blah, submitted on behalf of the member states of the GCC, Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE, reaffirming its primary responsibility under the Charter of the United Nations for the maintenance of international peace and security, expressing grave concern over recent attacks against civilian areas, infrastructure, maritime shipping in the region, condemning in the strongest possible terms the attacks attributed to Iran. Condemning in the strongest terms the attacks attributed to Iran. Notice the attributed. This is probably what Russia says. Oh, well, at least put in the attributed. So that would seem like we scored a point against the West. We just put in attributed. We didn't say it was. We managed to get that concession. It was that it was attributed to Iran. It wasn't deemed Iran wasn't deemed to be responsible against neighboring states in Jordan, including attacks against civilian objects and residential areas. So far, Iran is the only country that has been mentioned about attacks attributed to Iran. Recognizing the inherent right of individual and collective self-defense as reflected in Article 51 of the Charter of the UN, 1. Condemns in the strongest terms the attacks carried out by Iran. So that's just boom, boom. There it is. Not attributed, carried out by Iran. So there it is. That's the UN Security Council resolution condemning Iran. Carried out by Iran against neighboring states and civilian objects, including attacks against residential areas and maritime traffic. No mention of any attacks carried out against Iran, because we had a story in the Financial Times today, something like 17,000 residential buildings have been hit in Iran in just the space of 12 days. Demands that Iran immediately cease all such attacks. Second time the mention of Iran. Demands that Iran immediately cease all such attacks and refrain from further actions that threaten regional and international peace and security. Calls upon Iran to hold threats, provocations, and interference with, third time, Iran holds threats, provocations, and interference with maritime navigation and trade, including the Strait of Hormuz. Condemns support provided to armed groups and proxies operating in the region that threaten neighboring states. So that's also obviously a dig at Iran, because it's always Iran that is deemed to be providing support to armed groups and proxies operating in the region. So that's it. So that's the demands of the UN Security Council against Iran, and Russia and China abstained. With this document, Russia and China abstained. 5. Affirms the right of affected states to act in self-defense consistent with international law and the Charter of the United Nations. Okay, so at least that it declares that the Gulf states have the right to act in self-defense. It doesn't say Israel. So Israel doesn't, there's no reference here to Israel or the United States as having a right to act in self-defense. Calls on all states to exercise restraint and to pursue diplomatic solutions aimed at reducing tensions. Requests that the Secretary General report to the Council on developments related to the implementation of this resolution, and then decides to remain active. So that's the resolution that was adopted. As anybody can see, that's pretty one-sided. I mean, there's a lot about Iran and everything, on all of the sins of Iran, egregious sins of Iran. No mention of Israel, no mention of the United States, no mention of any attacks on Iran. All of the bombings of Iran is not mentioned. The attacks on the oil refineries, which has resulted in this horrific emission of noxious gases, of black rain. None, that's all kind of by the by. It's not no mention of that in the Security Council resolution, which has been adopted. That's where it's now been adopted. It's there. It is. Boom. It's in the UN document base. That is now the applicable Security Council resolution. Anyway, here then is I think this is the Russian. This is the Russian draft, the one that was rejected. The Security Council, recalling the purposes and principles of the Charter of the United Nations, including the obligation of all states to refrain from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state, expressing grave concern over the military escalation in the Middle East, following the large-scale strikes carried out against the Islamic Republic of Iran beginning on the 28th of February. So there it is. It's mentioned in the Russian draft. The military escalation in the Middle East following the large-scale strikes carried out against the Islamic Republic of Iran beginning on the 28th of February, noting the risk that the current escalation may threaten international peace and security and global economic stability. Okay, reaffirming the sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity of all states in the region, calls for an immediate cessation of hostilities and urges all parties to refrain from further military action. Okay, so all parties, so there's no calls upon the United States and Israel to cease military strikes against the Islamic Republic of Iran, and urges all states to respect the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Iran. So that's in the Russian draft. No mention of anything like that in the actual resolution that was adopted. So there's a call for an immediate cessation of hostilities, all hostilities, calls upon the United States and Israel to cease military strikes against the Islamic Republic of Iran. There's no mention of that in the resolution adopted. Calls upon Iran to exercise restraint and refrain from actions that could further escalate the situation. So there's some balance there. Calls upon Iran to exercise restraint. Urges all parties to resolve their differences through diplomatic means, calls upon protection of civilians, calls for the safety of international maritime navigation, including the Strait of Hormuz, requests the Secretary General to report urgently, and so decides to remain seized of the matter. So that's the resolution, which was, as we can see, even-handed, but nonetheless not adopted. And then here is the account of the debate that took place. This is the account on of the United Nations, and obviously they're kind of gleeful. Bahrain is very gleeful. The message is clear, said Bahrain's representative. The international community is resolute in rejecting these Iranian unjust, hostile acts that are targeting sovereign countries and that threaten the stability of their peoples. Noting that nearly 140 member states co-sponsored the resolution, he said the high number reflected the world's collective conscience. The Gulf region is a pillar of global security, trade, and economic stability, emphasizing that protecting the Middle East is therefore an entire world's interest. Well, it obviously isn't a pillar of global security, trade, and economic stability, and it never was. As long as the United States and Israel waged this war against Iran, it was totally illusory to believe that somehow this was an ocean of stability. It wasn't. It was never an ocean of stability. It was just a fiction. Here, people could just go and make lots and lots of money. In the meantime, United States and Israel just go ahead and pursue their military campaign against Iran, and they can just simply peacefully just make money and ignore everything going on around them. Well, Iran has shown, yeah, you can't do it. You hold these bases, U.S. bases on your territory. These are bases that are being used against us. So you're not going to enjoy stability. It's tough luck, but you're not going to enjoy stability. And so anyway, let's just continue that. This the account of the debate at the Security Council, and so we have the who's this? This is the Denmark's representative. This is Denmark. They're the ones who were agitating. Do you remember a few weeks ago we were talking about Greenland? God, it all seems so long ago now. Greenland, we got to keep Greenland. America might invade Greenland. But but America attacking Iran, okay, that's fine. America might use ground forces to invade Iran. Yeah, it's okay. Just leave Greenland alone. At this crucial moment, it is imperative to listen to the voices of the region, said Denmark's representatives. She pointed to the large number of delegations across the Council and the wider UN membership supporting the attacks. Every day passing, we are witnessing a further destabilization of the already volatile and tense situation. But who destabilized what? Who made things volatile and tense? And then this war. This is the France's representative. This war, which poses grave risks to regional security, must end now. Only respect for international law and diplomacy can ensure the lasting security and stability of the region. Stressing that Tehran has vastly expanded the war in recent days, he declared, Iran bears a heavy responsibility for the current escalation. Notice the convoluted language. Iran bears a heavy responsibility for the current escalation. Yes, we should have a last week's escalation. That was okay. It's the current escalation that we're not happy with. So the escalation that with the bombing entailed, well, that was okay. It's this escalation that we have a problem with. What about the escalation of Israel hitting Iran's oil refineries and causing this huge damage to Iran? Or is that not, or Iran bears responsibility for that, is it? Or that's the escalation, that's the good escalation as opposed to the bad escalation? Heavy responsibility for the current escalation. That's the bad escalation. But the good escalation was attacking Iran. That was fine. He added that France has long been concerned by Iran's nuclear threat. So that and its support for regional proxies. Oh, that's great. And did that justify an attack on Iran? Anyway, and then this is Mike Waltz. He's the U.S. Permanent representative. He says Iran shoots in all directions, as opposed to us. We only shoot in one direction. Iran shoots in all directions, and then it says nations that previously had serious disagreements with each other have now joined together and spoken with one voice. Bahrain itself, a victim of these attacks, drafted and led the negotiations on the text, which was supported by a record number of co-sponsors. Okay, but Bahrain has now realized that hosting the Fifth Fleet puts you in the line of fire. I mean, Bahrain should have thought of that. I mean, or they all should have thought of that. I mean, yeah, it was very nice as long as it lasted. You were making a shitload of money, but you were in the line of fire. Now you need to rethink about your security. You need to rethink about your neighbors, the security of the region, and don't expect the United States to provide you with safety and comfort. It's not going to do it. And China's representative, who abstained, pointed out that the United States and Israel launched military strikes without council authorization. and must cease their actions immediately. And then, of course, the question says, well, okay, why didn't you, how can I put it? Why didn't you veto this resolution? Because we did what Russia tells us to do. While stressing that the sovereignty, security, and territorial integrity of Gulf Arab states must be fully respected, he cautioned that the resolution just adopted does not fully reflect the root cause and overall picture of the conflict in a balanced manner. You think? It wasn't a balanced resolution? Yeah. And then the representative of Pakistan voted in favor of the text, but he would also support a second draft tabled by the Russian Federation. Anyway, this was the vote on the on the Russia's draft resolution. 4 in favor: China, Pakistan, Russian Federation, and Somalia. Well, that's interesting. Somalia is in the currently a member of is a member of the Security Council. But it gets bombed by the United States. That's yeah. That's kind of an interesting one. I'm not sure whether has that ever happened that a Security Council member got bombed by another Security Council member. Yeah, okay. And then we have 9 abstentions. This is on the Russian draft: Bahrain, Colombia, Democratic Republic of Congo, Denmark, France, Greece, Liberia, Panama, and the United Kingdom. And 2 against: the United States and Latvia. Imagine Latvia is on the Security Council. So Latvia was voted against. We're deeply disappointed, says Russia Federation delegate, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, and then, okay, we have the Chinese thing also. Anyway, here was this draft resolution. This is the French representative says this draft resolution. This is the Russian resolution. Says nothing about the overwhelming responsibility borne by Iran in the current escalation. So we had this. This is the current escalation. You had to do some really fancy footwork to come up with something so dishonest. Well, for the current escalation, I mean, there had to be all these diplomats sat there thinking about how they can craft an almost meaningless terminology where Iran is responsible for the current escalation. But who started this war? Who attacked whom? Well, that's not that, we're not concerned with that. We're only concerned with the current escalation, including its indiscriminate and unjustified attacks against its regional neighbors who pose no threat. Well, they did pose a threat. I mean, if there were U.S. Forces were based there, then they posed a threat. I mean, Iran has said we're not attacking our neighbors; we're attacking the U.S. bases that are located in our neighbors' territory. So it's not true that they targeted their neighbors. Anyway, then we have the representative of the United States, Mike Waltz, said that the Russian Federation knew it did not have the votes to adopt this resolution today, yet it insisted on proceeding to a vote. And then the Latvia's delegate said, who voted against the Russian Federation's proposed text, said it was tabled by a permanent member of the Council, which has for years been using force against civilians and civilian infrastructure in a sovereign country. You can always rely on the Baltic Chihuahuas to come in with their usual ranting and raving about Russia. And then she stressed, Iran is now attacking its neighbors with the same weapons. Iran is attacking its neighbors. Imagine, Iran is not the one being attacked. No, Iran is attacking. Anyway, here is, and the UK, it's impossible to overlook the hypocrisy of Russia presenting itself here as a guardian of international peace and security. And anyway, then we have Nebenzia, who is the Russia's permanent representative at the UN. So now he has to do some explanation. I mean, why did you abstain on that very one-sided resolution? I mean, Iran is supposed to be your ally. Iran is a member of BRICS, and you abstained on this resolution. So Nebenzia says, well, the Russian Federation abstained in the vote on the draft resolution tabled by Bahrain because it's extremely unbalanced and does not serve the purposes of maintaining international peace and security. The question wasn't, why didn't you vote for it? The question is, why didn't you veto it? And he doesn't really, he goes on and on and on. He doesn't explain why, since you're a permanent member of the Security Council, you are in a position to stop any one-sided resolution directed against your ally. I would like to make it clear right away, we do not understand and regret the situation in which the Middle East countries find themselves today. Moreover, Russia deems unacceptable any strikes on the territory of Arab states in the Persian Gulf, in particular on civilian infrastructure there. From the very outset, our country's leadership and personally President Putin has gone into efforts to de-escalate the situation and stop the bloodshed, both in Iran and around it. Okay. And to our deep regret, the resolution that has just been adopted is framed precisely in such a biased and one-sided tone. Yeah, we know that. It muddles the cause and effect, yes. If someone who is not well versed in international affairs reads this resolution, they will inevitably get the impression that Tehran, willingly and out of malice, conducted an unprovoked attack on Arab countries. Yeah, you might indeed think that, because that's what the resolution says. At the same time, the attacks against the territory of Iran itself, let alone those who are behind them and carrying them out, are not only not condemned in the document, but simply left out. We kind of noticed that. And the Security Council has just signed off on this. The Security Council has just signed off on this. Now, let me think. You are a permanent member of the Security Council. You are one of the founders of the United Nations. Therefore, if you have a one-sided document, and your draft resolution, the resolution you put forward, was rejected, the United States voted against it. I mean, you wouldn't have had the votes anyway, but the United States, because of all the abstentions, but the United States actually vetoed it. Then the question is, well, why didn't you veto this one, this resolution? Because now that's on the record. And yet he says here, well, the UN Security Council has signed off on it, as if he has no agency. He couldn't have stopped it. He couldn't have stopped it. China couldn't have stopped it, there was nothing we could do. Well, I mean, then why do you even have a veto? Just give up the veto. Anyway, so Nebenzia then goes on. And nor does the document mention the fact that the authorities in Tehran have repeatedly emphasized that their retaliatory actions are directed not against the countries in the region, but against U.S. military facilities and infrastructure located on their territory, and are legitimate targets within Iran's right of self-defense under Article 51 of the UN Charter. Yes, that's the point. Since it doesn't mention that, then that resolution should have been vetoed. We can't but note that Washington, through its aggressive actions, has essentially set up the countries of the GCC. The U.S. ignored the repeated requests of Arab states not to use their territory to conduct military operations against Iran. Yeah, that's right, they ignored them. And that should be a lesson to the countries of the GCC that the United States isn't that interested in you. I mean, they went ahead, launched their attack on Iran, and really didn't give a damn what the consequences would be for their great allies in the Persian Gulf. And it goes on. According to the information we receive from open sources, the U.S. is actively using its permanent military bases for this purpose, first and foremost, those deployed in the monarchies of the Persian Gulf. Okay. And these bases are being used not for defensive or reconnaissance purpose, but rather for offensive ones. So so Russia is endorsing Iran's argument. What's what Iran is saying? We are retaliating in response to the attacks that were launched against us, unprovoked attacks by the United States. And we're hitting back where we can. We can't hit the US territory, but we can hit back on US bases in the Persian Gulf. So we're not randomly just hitting all over the place. These are very targeted attacks. On February the 28th, the official website of the US CENTCOM, citing Admiral Brad Cooper, reported that high precision weapons had been launched against Iranian territory, not only from air and sea, but also from land. Obviously, this could only be a reference to the territory of the countries neighboring Iran. Yeah, that's right. It's no secret for anyone that the US base in Bahrain is the headquarters and the nerve center of the US Fifth Fleet. Yeah. Which is the main force against Iran. The US Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia is the main maintenance point for the US Air Force in the region. Yeah. The largest military air base, Al Udeid, located in Qatar, could be used not only as a major element of the US and NATO global air defense system, but also for deploying strike fighters, bombers, and refueling planes, as well as for suppressing air defense and target acquisition. And then the Al Dhafra base in the UAE is also very suitable for these purposes and for gathering intelligence. A significant role in military operations against Iran is also being played by US base in Kuwait, Jordan, and Iraq, and so on. And it says all of this was mentioned in Iraq when justifying its strikes on US military facilities in Arab countries. So all excellent points, and say, yeah, there's no mention of any of that in the resolution. So why didn't you veto it? The unconditional imperative to protect civilians and infrastructure in the current conflict is also presented in the adopted resolution in a very one-sided manner. Strikes targeting civilians and civilian infrastructure are unacceptable under any circumstances and in any country, be it Iran, Bahrain, Jordan, Qatar, Kuwait, Oman, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Israel. However, the GCC draft suggests that no one has ever attacked the civilian population of Iran. No, there's no mention of any of that. As if there had been no horrific attack on the girls' school in Minab. No, there was no mention of the attack on the girls' school, which killed nearly 200 children. Yeah, there was no mention. As if there had been no cynical assassination of Iran's supreme leader. No, there's no mention of that. As if there had been no strikes targeting peaceful nuclear and oil infrastructure. No mention of that. Which could result in catastrophic consequences, not just economic ones, and not just for the people of Iran and neighboring countries, but also for states beyond the Middle East. The sponsors of the draft simply suggest that we turn a blind eye to all these unlawful actions and unprovoked aggression against Iran by the US and Israel. Yes, there's no mention of any of that. The only country condemned in that resolution, which has been adopted, is Iran. And then it says this is the Russian proposal, and then we go on, and then here's Nebenzia talking about his own draft resolution. It says the draft tabled by our country leaves aside the differences among council members regarding the causes and current unprecedented tension in the Middle East. It's simple, straightforward, and unambiguous. 4 operative paragraphs. The first one urges all parties to immediately stop their military activities, refrain from any steps that could lead to further escalation. Second one firmly condemns all attacks against civilians and civilian infrastructure. Third, underlines the importance of ensuring security of all states in the region. And fourth, strongly encourages all parties concerned to return to the negotiating table. All right, and that's the one that got 4 votes, 4 out of 15. And anyway, then he goes on that this is then Zaharova, who was gave a statement today for she's the spokeswoman for the Russian Foreign Ministry. And she says, given the numerous questions, I would like to comment on the March the 11th UN Security Council meeting on this topic. As you know, the UN Security Council adopted Resolution 2817, drafted by Bahrain, which condemns attacks on Gulf Arab states and calls on Iran to immediately cease such actions. And then Russia and China abstained, as they disagree with the very concept of the document. Well, if they disagree with the very concept of the document, then why didn't they veto? They're veto-wielding members of the Security Council, as they disagree with the very concept of the document, which is divorced from the underlying cause of the current escalation of the region. It seems as if Iran, seemingly of its own volition and out of malicious intent, has begun attacking targets in neighboring countries. Yeah, that's the thrust of the resolution. Moscow has repeatedly stated that the current crisis in the Middle East stems from unprovoked aggression of the United States and Israel against the Islamic Republic of Iran. We express our extreme dissatisfaction with the progress of the resolution. Its Bahraini authors refuse to accept a single Russian or Chinese proposal to correct their unbalanced text, and yet you abstain. And then Russia, with the support of its Chinese partners, proposed an alternative draft document and so on, aimed at urgent de-escalation. And then, regardless of the result of the UN Security Council vote on March 11th, we consider it important to reaffirm the right of Islamic Republic of Iran, like all other states, to self-defense in accordance with the Article 51 of the UN Charter. But that's precisely what you're now insisting on it, when that resolution precisely denies Iran the right to self-defense. What is the point of saying this something so ridiculous? Regardless of the results of the UN Security Council vote, we consider it important to reaffirm the right of the Islamic Republic of Iran to self-defense in accordance with Article 51 of the UN Charter, when that resolution precisely denied Iran that right to self-defense. We consider attacks on civilian targets and infrastructure in Iran, neighboring Arab countries, and elsewhere unacceptable. We call on the United States and Israel to cease their aggression and return to the negotiating table. Well, return to the negotiating table. Well, I don't think anyone wants to return to the negotiating table, because those negotiations were a ruse. They were a hoax. They were a fraud. They were undertaken in order to lull the Iranians into a sense of security. The worst, most despicable act you can do in any kind of diplomacy, when you pretend to be negotiating, whereas in reality, you're simply preparing your military attack. So it says we called on them to return to the negotiating table. Well, I mean, why would anyone return to the negotiating table? That means, hey, we get clobbered the very next day when we return to the negotiating table. It is imperative that all parties to the current conflict in the Middle East, including our Arab partners, exercise common sense and restraint, renounce double standards, and resume effort. And then, and then we have, okay. So that's the rather pathetic performance, really, on the part of the two permanent members of the Security Council. They had an opportunity to veto this and thereby show support to the victim of the aggression. So it was Iran was the victim of the aggression. One other topic I just want to mention, because which I think is interesting to discuss. I mean, it's on a different topic. Is, as you know, Hungary is, of course, in the midst of a general election campaign, which takes place on April the 12th. And we're getting all of the familiar election manipulation that we've become used to in Europe. Whenever a candidate that the EU wants to see defeated, that the EU feels a threat, then we have the usual disinformation and manipulation operation that going into effect, and it's always the same thing. And what happens is, we've seen it in Romania, we saw it in Moldova, we see it in Georgia. You scream, Russia! Russia is interfering. Not the EU is not interfering. Russia is interfering. I mean, you don't have to present any evidence, because you only have to say Russia, and the dutiful hacks of the mainstream media, sit there and write, Russia is obviously interfering in this election. So what happened recently is that an outlet, this is one of these outlets that we've become familiar with. They're funded by the EU, funded by National Endowment for Democracy, Soros, the usual thing. It all comes from the same trough. They're funneling money. And anyway, one of these media outlets called V Square published a story the other day claiming, yes, Russia was going into a major operation mode to secure the re-election of Viktor Orban. And so here is the story that appeared in V Square. Now, there's never any evidence presented, because what happens is you get anonymous claims by unnamed intelligence officials. So here is the story in V Square. Putin's GRU-linked election fixers are already in Budapest to help Orban. Moscow has dispatched a team to Budapest to interfere in Hungary's April 2026 parliamentary elections. V Square has learned from multiple European national security sources. Well, that's always good. We have multiple European national security sources. The operation, overseen by Putin confidant Sergei Kiriyenko, is designed to help Viktor Orban, designed to keep Viktor Orban in power, and follows the same blueprint Russia used in Moldova. So, as we remember, in Moldova, the EU stole that election outright by just banning political parties that were a threat to Maya Sandu. They just banned the parties and said, "Oh, these parties are really working for Russia." So that's what you do. You outlaw media outlets by saying, "Oh, they're working for Russia." I mean, they did that in Romania, where you had that Georgescu, who was on the brink of winning the presidency, and then they canceled the election, claiming Russia was interfering. So here you have this claim, the same blueprint Russia used in Moldova. They say Russia used it. The blueprint was an outrageous, massive interference in Moldova on the part of Europe, a purge of political parties and media that were a threat to Maya Sandu, the EU's candidate, and then they blame everything on Russia. The Kremlin has tasked a team of political technologists with interfering in Hungary's April 2026 parliamentary election. V Square has learned. So, imagine you're writing an article. This is funded. This media outlet is funded by the EU, European governments, the CIA cutouts, such as the National Endowment for Democracy, and they're just peddling this stuff without any real evidence, from national security sources. Oh yeah, we have it on good authority that this is the Russians have moved They're chess pieces to keep Orban in power. The operation is said to be overseen by Sergei Kirienko, Putin's first deputy chief of staff, and the principal architect of Russia's political influence infrastructure at home and abroad. Now, you notice, given how easily the EU manages to steal all these elections, whether it's in Romania or in Moldova. I mean, Sergei Kirienko is not doing very much of a job. I mean, they couldn't even get Moldova. I mean, Moldova had been a part of the USSR, but even there, they can't do very much. So he's the principal architect of Russian political influence infrastructure at home and abroad. A former head of the state of nuclear corporation Rosatom, Kirienko was appointed Putin's domestic policy chief in 2016 and has since significantly expanded his portfolio to encompass foreign electoral interference. So there's the foreign electoral interference. We don't interfere in other countries' elections. They interfere. His most recent and most aggressive deployment was in Moldova, where operatives under his direction ran vote-buying networks, troll farms, and on-the-ground influence campaigns aimed at undermining pro-European President Maya Sandu. So remember, Maya Sandu, as I said, she not only outlawed political parties with just 48 hours to go before the election. I mean, just outlawed them. She not only outlawed media outlets, she basically issued arrest warrants against opposition politicians. It just basically, she imprisoned political opponents, all in the name of democracy, all in the name of keeping out Russia. And then, even then, Maya Sandu was never going to win that election. So they basically had to prevent Moldovans living in Russia from voting. I mean, basically, they just didn't provide them with any means of registering their vote. So basically, they never got to vote. The Moldovan diaspora living in Western Europe, they got there were lots of polling stations all over Western Europe, but in Russia there were just 2 in Moscow, and they only provided in each case 5,000 ballots. So that's tough luck. I mean, you can't. There's no way they could work. There was more than 10,000 votes that could be registered in Russia. Well, then that's it. Tough luck, buddy. You don't get to vote against Maya Sandu. And then here is this V Square just writing all this about Russia was interfering in Moldova. And then we have the operation produced mixed results, but according to sources familiar with intelligence, the same playbook is now being applied to Hungary. National security sources from 3 different European countries said the intelligence has been shared with allied services. Also, so they're all basically sharing this nonsense, this intelligence. I mean, it's the last thing one can call this is intelligence. They're all sharing it. Where are they coming from? Well, they're probably coming from Latvia. They're coming from Estonia and Poland. And then many are already aware of the effort. The United States has also shared sensitive intelligence on the matter in February. And then, since the Moldova operations, Kirienko's foreign influence structure has undergone reorganization. In late 2025, President Putin established a new presidential directorate for strategic partnership and cooperation, dissolving 2 departments previously run by Dmitry Kozak. So this all sounds very, very impressive. And then he goes on. The operation also has a ground component. According to European national security sources, the plan involves embedding a team of social media manipulation specialists within the Russian embassy in Budapest, provided with diplomatic or service passports to shield them from expulsion. That's not, you can't be, You can't be shielded from expulsion. I mean, whether I mean, see, this is so stupid. Any diplomat can be expelled. He's just declared a persona non grata. He can't be prosecuted. If you have diplomatic immunity, you can't be prosecuted, but you can be expelled. If you don't have diplomatic immunity, then of course you can be prosecuted and imprisoned. So, I mean, the idea that anyone can be shielded from expulsion, but also why would they be worried about shielding from expulsion? Because presumably they're there to help Orban. Why would I mean, according to the logic, why would Orban government want to expel them? But anyway, it doesn't really matter. But it sounds very clandestine. Shield them from expulsion. This approach mirrors tactics used in Moldova. So notice how this, it's constant reference to Moldova. That's really the model, which, as I say, was entirely a total intelligence operation. Maya Sandu was never going to win that election. They had to steal it outright, and they could only do it by screaming Russia. Where Russian embassy personnel were found to have coordinated subversive activities on the ground. They weren't found to have anything. I mean, anyone can make any accusation at all. Since you never bring proper criminal charges, then who the hell cares? Prompting Moldovan authorities to reduce Russia's diplomatic staff by more than 2/3 after years of trying to dismantle the network. No, they had to they had to present an alibi for their dismal electoral prospects. Sources describe the Budapest contingent as a 3-person team. I mean, who the hell? Where are they getting this nonsense from? It's a 3-person team, and you know this how? 3-person team operating on behalf of the GRU, Russia's military intelligence service. This task force arrived in Budapest weeks ago, though it remains unclear whether they have yet begun their influence activities. So you know when they arrived and who they are, who they're working for, but you don't know whether they've begun their influence activities. Their exact identities have also been established by Western intelligence agencies. So why aren't they expelled? The operation fits a broader pattern. As V-Square has previously reported, Hungary is unusually friendly in hosting Russian military diplomats with suspected GRU affiliations, some of whom cultivated contacts within the Hungary's government-aligned media ecosystem, such as German-Hungarian pro-government propagandist Georg Spöttl, who maintained a close relationship with a Russian military attaché. Pro-Orban outlets have in recent months amplified Kremlin-aligned narratives on Ukraine with growing intensity. A media environment that analysts know it's conducive to the kind of influence operation now being described. I mean, it's just all kind of making daisy chains out of words. Influence operation. No evidence whatsoever has been presented here. Anyway, the Financial Times immediately jumped in on this. And then ran a big story, front page story. Kremlin backs covert campaign to keep Viktor Orban in power. Vladimir Putin endorses plan drawn up by Russian consultancy that is under Western sanctions. The Kremlin has launched a disinformation campaign aimed at helping Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban get re-elected next month, according to people familiar with the matter. Now, Vladimir Putin's administration has endorsed a plan by the social design agency, a Kremlin-linked media consultancy under Western sanctions, to bolster Orban's Fidesz party by flooding social media with messages designed in Russia and posted by influential Hungarians. So this is familiar stuff from the Russiagate years, whereby they have these messages. If the messages seem to be against Ukraine or against the EU, or they're critical of Kaya Kallas, critical of Ursula von der Leyen. That obviously it was done by the Russians. I mean, no one can possibly think any such horrific thoughts. It must be by Russia. And so all these social messages are obviously crafted by um, the Kremlin. And Financial Times just writes all this. Completely oblivious. I mean, just no attempt made to inquire into the veracity of these claims. Hey, they're organized by the Kremlin. So anyone who's putting out messages, negative messages about Kaya Kallas or the Hungarian opposition leader Peter Magyar, well, obviously it's Kremlin. Social media with messages designed in Russia and posted by influential Hungarians. The campaign frames Orban as the only candidate who can keep Hungary sovereign and treat world leaders as equals, according to a proposal written by the agency for the Kremlin late last year and seen by the FT. Seen by the FT. And, well, the question then arises, who presented this document to the FT? Can we actually take a look at this document and see whether it's actually a genuine document rather than a document drafted by Western intelligence services, which of course it was. A proposal written by the agency for the Kremlin, which we managed to get our hands on. Isn't that fortunate? You managed to get your hands on this proposal written by the agency for the Kremlin, but you can't show us this document. It intends to contrast Orban, a strong leader with global friends, with his main rival, Peter Magyar, a Brussels puppet with no outside support. And then Magyar has emerged as the most serious. And then the plan suggests information attacks against Magyar, whose TISA party is ahead in opinion polls, and so on. And then independent outlet V-Square reported last weekend that 3 officers from Russia's GRU and so on. So just repeating all this without any attempt to do some independent checking. Magyar, who had previously avoided antagonizing Russia, called for them to be removed and said, "Russians go home," echoing. But notice how it's all working for Magyar. Magyar seizes on this and uses it as his vehicle for winning the election. So suddenly, Russians go home. So that's the slogan from 1956, Ruski Hoza. Russians go home. That's cute. Almost as if this whole thing is being coordinated. The Russian operatives are likely to be working for Sergei Kiriyenko, likely to be working. Putin's powerful deputy chief of staff. I mean, you always know when you've got bullshit in your hands when they use these adjectives like powerful. It doesn't mean anything, whatever they're but they put it in there just to make their case more persuasive. Powerful deputy chief of staff. They can't just leave it as Putin's deputy chief of staff, which sounds pretty powerful. I mean, if you're the deputy chief of staff to the Russian president, no, he has to be a powerful deputy chief of staff who sits in a palatial office in the Kremlin. He's previously directed similar campaigns run by the Social Design Agency and so on. And here, anyway, this is the rest of it. And then the US, the UK, and several other Western countries added the Russian agency and its senior leadership to their sanction list in 2024 for running an extensive online campaign known as Doppelganger, which posted, remember the Doppelganger? This is another one of these. It posted fake news and AI-generated deep fakes to stoke anti-Ukrainian sentiment. It's the easiest thing in the world. Anyone can post fake news and anyone can do AI-generated deep fakes. I mean, the internet is full of that. Mindful that overt Russian interference could backfire against Orban, the social design agency has not liaised with the Hungarian government directly and set out plans to contact local influencers through go-betweens, the people said. So that way you're covered. Oh yeah, there's no evidence of this, but we know it's happening. Anyway, unlike Doppelganger, the Hungarian campaign is intended to look native, with the Russian-designed memes, infographics, videos, and stories tailored to Hungary. Okay. And then, of course, he brings up this story, which I think is quite interesting. We talked about this last week. The mysterious gold bullion and cash that is being transported across Hungary by Ukraine. And nobody ever even bothers to explain, well, why was gold bullion and cash being transported against Hungary? But instead, the media focusing on Orban. Oh, it's obviously Orban is just, this is all by, he's trying to manipulate the news in order to win the election, but as journalists, you would think, well, they might want to find out. I mean, it's very unusual to be transporting cash, a large amount of cash, 50 million euros in cash, gold bullion in cash, across Hungary. I mean, territory. I mean, it's a very peculiar thing to do, and you might want to find out, well, why are they doing this? But instead, all the focus is on Orban. And here is a story in Politico, which is Orban's rival accuses Kremlin of new smear blitz in Hungary election. So this is Hungarian opposition leader Peter Magyar is accusing the Kremlin of supporting the election campaign of Prime Minister Viktor Orban with a new barrage of disinformation videos that are supposed to appear on Thursday. This is the standard operating procedure by this Magyar. A total, complete, a waste of space, a completely empty figure, whose entire campaign is made up of claims that Orban is trying to discredit him. I mean, that's what he seems to, that's what he ever says. Well, Orban is trying to discredit me. He's going to release this disinformation videos. But these disinformation videos never appear. So they just all, essentially, it's just Magyar is claiming that there exist these disinformation videos that Orban is about to release. And of course, Russia is behind this. Orban is the EU leader closest to Russian President Vladimir Putin and a persistent obstacle to Brussels' support for Ukraine. Magyar said on Tuesday that he'd received information that the attack would take the form of 14 AI-generated smear videos, and complained that the disinformation campaign has been produced with the help of Russian intelligence services. So this is, again, the Russian intelligence services. Oh, excellent. People in Magyar's Tisza party and analysts in Budapest have long expected the race to get dirty as it enters the final stretch. But what's remarkable, as the same as the FT story, this Politico, is that the Politico reporter, it never occurs to him to wonder whether Magyar is just simply making this stuff up, because these videos never appear. So Magyar may just be making it up in order to generate sympathy that he is the victim of a disinformation campaign that never seems to appear. Magyar's tactic is to sound the alarm on the alleged impending smear attacks against Tisza before they land, hoping to blunt their impact. That's the same strategy he adopted in mid-February when faced with the prospect that his opponents could release a sex tape featuring him. He went public and accused Fidesz of planning to release a tape recorded with Secret Service equipment and possibly fake, in which my then girlfriend and I are seen having intimate intercourse. As if anyone in the world is really interested in his girlfriend at the time, and him having intimate intercourse. For now, that intervention seems to have worked, and such a video has not yet been released. Again, notice how Politico, it never occurs to them that, hey, Magyar just simply made the whole stuff up. Well, let's remember also, and we did a whole podcast on that. The issue with that with that party during which he supposedly had intimate intercourse with his then girlfriend. The issue wasn't his intimate intercourse with his then girlfriend. The issue was that there were drugs at the party, and Magyar himself subsequently admitted that he saw drugs at the party, but he didn't partake of the drugs, but nonetheless he stayed at the party even though he saw the drugs there. Now, I mean, you can argue that shouldn't disqualify him as a candidate, but nonetheless, it's since drugs are illegal and he saw an illegality there, is that the right approach for somebody who aspires to be prime minister? That he didn't really care very much about this presence of illegal drugs, and he carried on having intimate intercourse with his then girlfriend. So that was the issue. But he's made it out that there was supposed to be a sex tape was going to be released, but no one's interested in any sex tape. I mean, it's like that's ridiculous that there was going to be any kind of interest in the release of a sex tape. But the media were happy to play along with this Magyar plan. Anyway, here. On Thursday, just as Magyar arrives to campaign to the constituents of the Danube close to Budapest, his team expects Fidesz to target the local candidate and her family with AI-generated videos, which will be promoted via fake accounts. Magyar announced his concerns on social media and called on Orban to immediately halt the planned election fraud and order Russian agents out of Hungary. So he's demanding Orban do something for which he has been presented no evidence that Orban had any intention of doing. The Russian agents. So what's this? How did he get this thing of the Russian agents out of Hungary? This came out from this story from V Square, which was fed by Western intelligence agents. They fed that story to V Square about the Russian agents. Then Financial Times picks this up and then posts it on its front page about the GRU is actively involved in Hungary, trying to secure election victory for Orban. It's too early to assess whether the strategy of going public will be successful for the sex tape and future smear campaign, said Peter Kreco, executive director of Political Capital, an independent political research consultant. It's not independent. It's wholly affiliated with the opposition. But they always say it's independent. It's not independent. But he added that anticipating Fidesz's moves had worked fairly well to build Magyar's Teflon image because no scandals had yet burnt him. Well, of course, they're not using any scandals. This is all being peddled, by Magyar and his political advisor. Oh, they're about to release some dirt, some smear, AI-generated videos. And when they don't, wow, God, we stop them in their tracks. But anyway, in a further development with Orban, we talked last week about the threats of violence that were emanated from Zelensky. Remember, Zelensky said, "Well, I'm going to give out his home address and phone number to some of our Ukrainian forces, and they can go and have a chat with him." This was such an egregious threat of violence that even the EU had to step in and say, "Well, this is not really acceptable. You can't just go and threaten the head of government of a EU member state with violence." But that was Zelensky. But the threats of violence have continued, and here is the story from The Guardian today. about quite serious threats that to Orban coming from various Ukrainians. I mean, these Ukrainians, I mean, these are psychotic. You don't want to joke with them. We saw the violence that they were capable of at Maidan. We saw the violence they were capable of at Odessa. We saw the violence that they're capable of, all the assassinations and terrorism and sabotage that they've engaged in. And then, of course, we saw their violence with Nord Stream. They had to have been involved in some ways, Nord Stream. So when they issue threats against anyone, you have to take them seriously. So, but of course, the media purport not to take any of this seriously and think, oh, it's all just Orban worrying about re-election. And here is The Guardian, which says Hungary's Orban claims Ukrainians threatened his family as election campaign ramps up. Prime Minister makes claim as accusations mount that he's using row with Ukraine for political gain in run-up to elections. Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orban has accused Ukrainians of plotting to attack his family, and yes, an increasingly bitter standoff between Kiev and Budapest continues. Orban and his allies appear to be using the dispute for maximum political gain. It's all about this, how he's trying to gain political gain. Not, of course, Magyar, of course, not doing anything. Magyar is just this innocent Simon Pure type character. He's not doing anything for political gain. And of course, Ukraine's threats are not, we don't have to worry about that. Just maximum political gain before the election due next month and could end the 16-year rule. And then it says Orban released a video on Wednesday purporting to show him speaking to his daughters on the phone. I'm sure you'll see on the news that the Ukrainians have threatened not only me, but you as well, he said, apparently emotional. My kids and my grandkids, we have to take this seriously, but we must not be scared. And then it says Orban was apparently responding to the words of Hrigori Omelchenko, a retired politician who served in Ukraine's SBU security service in the 1990s. Okay, so this is a guy who worked in Ukraine's security service, and he's issuing threats against Orban, coming on top of the threats that Zelensky issued against Orban last week. Okay, nothing to worry about here, everything's cool. A marginal figure, he's a marginal figure, okay, who frequently makes outlandish claims. Okay, well, we don't have to worry about it. He's a marginal figure, he's outlandish claims, supposing you had a marginal figure making outlandish claims and threatening, say, Zelensky with violence. I wonder how would The Guardian respond to that? A marginal figure who frequently makes outlandish claims, he issued threats to Orban in a televised interview this week, suggesting vigilantes could hunt down the Hungarian leader if he did not change his anti-Ukrainian position. Okay, so that's coming on top of Zelensky last week, talking about how he was going to give out Orban's address and phone number to some Ukrainian armed servicemen. And now we have this former SBU guy saying vigilantes could hunt down the Hungarian leader if he did not change his anti-Ukrainian position. And then earlier, Zelensky had threatened to give this person's address while speaking about Orban in comments that reportedly prompted European allies to ask the Ukrainian president to tone down his rhetoric. Well, just tone it down. I mean, we can't really have threats of violence. I mean, that's just not, it's just not cricket. Orban has long been the most pro-Russian leader of the EU nations, of course, leading to messy relations with Kiev, but as polling has him up 20 points behind, up to 20 points behind the challenger. The polls do not show him as 20 points behind. This is just made up by Guardian. So he is behind, depending, of course, on the polls you look at, but the 20 points was just simply an obvious outlier, and obviously published with a view to creating a sense of inevitability that Orban will lose. And And then the trigger for the latest round of tensions, it was Ukraine's claim that it would take several weeks to repair oil pipeline that transports Russian oil to Hungary, and so on. But the problem with that claim that he says, oh, well, it'll take a few weeks, is that when Hungary and Slovakia have demanded that they be allowed to inspect the damage, the supposed damage to the Druzhba pipeline, Ukraine said no. So essentially, we have to take Zelensky's word for it that it's going to take weeks and weeks to repair the pipeline, since he's refusing to allow anyone, and the EU as well. The EU also suggested sending a team of experts to examine the pipeline. Zelensky said no. But the media continue to write, oh, well, serious damage to the pipeline. Yeah. Anyway, so that's the latest on the Hungarian election. Let's now take a look at the Gaggle board. These are the comments from the Gagglers, the people who worry, understandably, about the situation with the dogs. They're concerned that the dogs feel that they're taken for granted, that they're not kept, in the lifestyle to which they've become accustomed. After all the work that they've done, they feel unappreciated. So I think really very grateful to all the Gagglers who keep the tip jar moving in a direction satisfactory to the dogs. So anyway, very very grateful. Thank you so much, the Gagglers. So first question is from Carlos FI. Says, good evening, Dr. Samueli. Good evening. I wanted to ask your opinion on one of the final sentences of the opening paragraph of Britannica's World War II entry, if you please, okay? Moreover, in 1941, the Nazi regime unleashed a war of extermination against Jews, Slavs, and other people deemed inferior by Hitler's ideology, while Stalinist Russia extended its campaign of terror against Ukrainians to the conquered Poles. Well, it's very very interesting. I mean that they presented in that form, but really there's no as suggesting that there's some sort of a symmetry that Stalin waged a campaign against Ukrainians and the conquered Poles. Now, Stalin, as a result of the non-aggression pact, took back territories that were seized by Poland during the war, the Soviet-Polish War of 1920, and that were then ceded to Poland following the Treaty of Riga. So this was territory that had belonged to the Russian Empire. No one at Versailles or anywhere else had deemed these territories as belonging to Poland. Poland's borders had been decided at Versailles, but Poland kind of got a little greedy and wanted some more, and so they seized on the opportunity of the civil war that was prevailed in Russia at the time to take this territory. And given the civil war and the primary needs of defeating the whites, which the Bolsheviks saw that was their primary goal, they signed this Treaty of Riga and ceded this territory to Poland. As I say, this was not assigned to Poland by the Paris Peace Conference, and that's why the Marquis of Curzon, had famously said, well, where the border between between Russia and Poland should be, and it was to be considerably to the west of what happened after the Treaty of Riga. So essentially, Stalin saw this as an opportunity, the non-aggression pact with Hitler, as a way of rectifying what happened at the Treaty of Riga. Now, this territory that Poland took was in large part inhabited by Ukrainians. They were not Poles. And that's why the Poles were really loathed and detested, because the Poland pursued the Polonization policy. They were trying to inflict their Polish culture on Ukrainians. And this, of course, led to the rise of the Ukrainian nationalist movement, Bandera. I mean, that's where Bandera made his name, committing terrorist acts against the Poles. And then this territory was taken back by Stalin in 1939. So I don't know why this is a little confusing by saying in 1941. In 1941, this was the Hitlerite. I mean, when I first read it, I thought they were talking about the period between 1939 and 41. When Stalin took back the territory, and then they conducted a certain purge against the Poles that inhabited that territory. But the campaign of terror against Ukrainians and the conquered Poles, that doesn't make any sense, because essentially in 1941. The Soviet forces were just driven back. I mean, this was. I mean, that's why I thought 1939-41, when they came under Soviet occupation, and they did take harsh measures against the Poles, in which maybe in part as payback for what happened during the Soviet-Polish War that I talked about. But they weren't conducting anything in 1941, because in 1941 the Soviet Union was on the brink of collapse under the impact of the Wehrmacht. So they pulled all their forces back. I mean, they moved eastward, and they weren't occupying anything. I mean, they were just simply retreating in the face of the Wehrmacht. So I'm just a bit confused about how that's formulated. But presenting it as a campaign of terror against Ukrainians, I think, it's just simply nonsensical, because Ukraine was a creation of the Bolsheviks. I mean, we've often said this. It was created by the Bolsheviks. I mean, they essentially promoted every nationalism except Russian nationalism. So it was in their interest to promote Ukrainian nationalism as against Russian nationalism. So this idea that they were against the Ukrainians makes no sense. They invented Ukraine. They kind of created this Ukrainian language and Ukrainian culture and everything else. That was all done by the Bolshevik in order, essentially, to diminish the influence of the Russian nation. So it's. I mean, this is a very misleading presentation. So it just makes just no sense. But most important, 1941, the Soviet Union was in retreat, in full retreat. Isn't engaging in any campaign of terror against anyone. They were just desperate to survive the Wehrmacht onslaught. Anyway, thank you so much, Carlos. And then Danaki says, Kedves George, exactly 1 month to go. Yep, today is 1 month to go. What is your feeling toward the outcome of the Hungarian elections? Well, as I talked a little bit about the latest developments. I have difficulties predicting. I'm not great at predicting election outcomes, to be honest. I've definitely a mixed record as to who would win. I'm skeptical of the polls that have Tisza substantially ahead. So it's possible Tisza would win, but would win very narrowly, and therefore it's possible that Orban could still retain power in a coalition. So that's a possibility. Um, the, the 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 problem with Tissa is that its candidate Magyar is just nothing. I mean, he's a zero, absolute, just empty suit, kind of good looking, young, kind of flashy, nicely dressed, cool sunglasses. Always has some attractive woman by his side, but he doesn't really stand for anything. He doesn't, he doesn't. There's no agenda there at all. So that's why people just guess, oh well, he's also anti-Russian, or but he doesn't want to pick a fight with the Russians. More he's better disposed towards Ukraine than Orban is. On the other hand, he's not going to support Ukrainian membership of the EU. No one can actually figure out what exactly he stands for, other than he's against corruption. Who isn't against corruption? So I think he's not a very formidable candidate, and I think that could, in the end, work against him in the last few weeks of the campaign, because ultimately people have to make a decision. It's all very well saying, "Oh, we're tired of Orban and we're bored with Orban," but then you can say, "Okay, do you want this guy for 4 years? This complete zero for 4 years?" And so, but look, electorates have made dumb decisions in the past. I mean, it's like no one knew anything about Barack Obama in 2008, but everyone voted for him. They wanted Obama to do well, and they wanted, the first black man as president. But he was a nothing. It was a zero. Everyone knew he was a zero. But they say, well, hey, why not vote for the guy? So that could work for Magyar. So if I were to make a prediction now, I'd say it's going to be a very tight race. I don't buy the polls that have him 9-10% ahead. I don't think that's the case. But I think Orban's got a month, and he could still pull it around, particularly on the issue that you're taking a risk. You're gonna, the Hungarian voters will say, "Hey, we're taking a risk." I mean, for all, whatever else we can say about Orban, he's kind of kept the migrants out. Despite all the pressure he came under, he kept out the immigrants. Can we be sure that Magyar is going to keep out the immigrants? He's kept Hungary out of the war. Can we be sure that Magyar is going to keep us out of that war? And then even his economic policies. I mean, a lot of people are unhappy, but he has maintained certain measure of economic protections. He's raised the minimum wage a number of times. He's given tax breaks to women with children. So, and he's favored Hungarian businesses as against European businesses. So, ultimately, it'll be down to whether people are willing to take a risk on someone that no one really knows very much about. He's just a cool guy, like Obama. He was just a cool guy. But anyway, thank you so much, Danaki. And Stone River, very good to see you again, Stone River. So Stone River says, George, the America First peace president was totally co-opted by the system. Is there anything that can stop the spread of empire? It's a very interesting question how this came about. I mean, when we talk about the empire and all the various things that he's blustered about, he really hasn't done much about anything with the exception of Iran. I mean, he talks about how he's going to take over Canada, but he's never explained how the hell he's going to take over Canada. He's going to be the 51st state. Well, That's gone nowhere. Oh, he's going to take over the Panama Canal. Okay, well, that's gone nowhere. He's going to take Denmark. Well, that's gone nowhere. He's going to send his forces into Mexico. Well, that hasn't happened. Um, uh, so, but the only thing that he has done is Iran, and that's where it becomes kind of interesting. That it seems like this is the one issue that seems to interest him, which is amazing. Why it would? I mean, yeah, he removed Maduro, but that didn't really change anything. Okay, you remove Maduro, and maybe he can bring some sort of an end of end of the government in Havana. I mean, maybe he can accomplish that. But what he's done in Iran is just beyond anything that he did during his first term, or he's done anything even during his second term, and it's in a way kind of inexplicable why he would take such enormous risks for America, enormous risks for the world economy, enormous risks for his own presidency on behalf essentially of Israel. And I don't think you can do anything. I mean, there's nothing in it for America. So that's why when you say about the spread of empire, so, I mean, you can at least see the argument. Okay, takes Greenland. Okay, well, maybe it's good for America. Okay, he's going to take Canada. All right, maybe it's good for America. Doubtful, but at least you can make the argument. Panama Canal. Okay, we're going to take back the Panama Canal. But at least you can make the argument. But you can't make the argument that waging a war against Iran does anything to make America more powerful. Just it's a disastrous proposition. And as we were talking about earlier, he has no real means of bringing it to an end. Because as we said earlier, just simply saying, oh, we won and now we can go home, that's not going to end it. So the question of why did he do it? Why would he embark on this venture that was only favored by the neocons, only favored by all the Lindsey Grahams and the Mark Levins and all the psychos who have been around since the 1990s, been around since the days of whenever they drafted that famous document, the Israeli think tank, a better path, a different way, or whatever it was. It was basically drafted by Israel with these those figures of the time, Douglas Feith, Richard Pearl, Wormser, who then rose to fame in the George W. Bush's Pentagon. So, but ever since then, these are the only people who have been wanting to wage this war against Iran. And now Trump did this. But there's nothing in it for America. It doesn't benefit America in any way at all. It only benefits Israel. So then the question is, why has Trump done this for Israel? Well, we can speculate about that. But I don't think it has anything to do with the spread of empire. You can argue whether about empire, whether you like it or you don't like it. But fundamentally, this has nothing to do with empire. This is about Israel. Israel first and foremost. So anyway, thank you so much. But that's why it's not even MAGA or America first. It's the very opposite of MAGA and America first. It's about Israel. Anyway, thank you so much, Stone River. And then Robert, in response to Stone River's comment, says, it's astonishing how Trump has managed to make Biden look competent and in scarcely a year. Indeed, very, very much so. Yes, exactly. That because at least Biden didn't get himself involved in anything like this. He would have, he would have had enough sense to avoid this. And said, no, thank you. This is a disaster. So yeah. It's and in fact, Antony Blinken, the Biden's hapless Secretary of State, said that Netanyahu was constantly um, pestering Obama. Instead of Obama, constantly pestering Obama to join him in this war against Iran. But of course, Netanyahu's been doing this with one president after another. He's been doing this, you know, since the 1990s, and he was, doing this very much with George W. Bush. But every president before Trump had the sense to say no to Netanyahu. That this is a very dangerous venture from which the United States derives no benefit. And you say, yeah, Biden looks competent. Biden said no also to Netanyahu. So yeah, all as you're right. Yeah, all in scarcely a year. And I think we're going to be writing about this. Historians are going to be writing about it and say how was it that Trump so completely betrayed all of his promises? I mean, this is a huge betrayal. I mean, a lot of politicians, because of the vicissitudes of circumstances, go back on their promises, go back on their word. But this is a war of choice, and his campaign to stay out of stupid wars, his campaign against the neocons and against the warmongers, it was central to his campaign. It was, it wasn't just simply, oh, it's just one of those things you say. It was central to who he was, central to his redefinition of the Republican Party. And so, and instead he embarks on this war of choice. It at the moment, I think it's still not easy to understand. I mean, obviously, we can speculate about, and for all sorts of explanations, but so far, I think we don't have any explanations that we can deem definitive. Um, anyway, then Cynthia, always very good to see you, Cynthia. Thank you so much, Cynthia. As I always say, a film critic, film encyclopedist, film scholar extraordinaire. She kind of enlightens Gagglers about film history and film production, and provides us with so much fascinating information about the films that we feature on our movie nights. And so, we're very fortunate every week to have the benefit of Cynthia's amazing knowledge and Cynthia's amazing research. So, um, you know, I can only say thank you, and I know a lot of Gagglers are also very appreciative of everything Cynthia does. And this week we featured a very interesting film, The Night of the Generals, and it's there posted on our locals page. And so watch the film. It's a very, very interesting, very unusual film. And of course, read Cynthia's very interesting, very enlightening comments and analyses of the film and of the aesthetics of the film. So it's a rare treat for Gagglers, and should be an incentive to all lurkers, and we welcome lurkers, but to lurkers to subscribe. Please subscribe to our community, the Gaggle community. We have really outstanding people who are members of our community, outstanding artists, outstanding critics, philosophers. So please subscribe. It doesn't cost very much, and you will enjoy extraordinary benefits. Anyway, now Cynthia's comment. Trump is blathering about the severe problems of maritime traffic through the Strait of Hormuz and proposes that a U.S. agency provide shipping insurance at reasonable rates. Yes, that's what he's demanding. By ignoring market risks, the plan forces taxpayers to subsidize the oil industry. Yes, that's right. rewarding corporate interests while exposing the public to losses. Worse, sailors face extreme danger with no real compensation. So few would volunteer, making the plan economically reckless and a textbook case of anti-free market cronyism. That's all excellent points. Yeah, it's a kind of um, yes, exactly. Of is it privatizing the profits and socializing the risks? Yeah, no, that's absolutely spot on. That he wants this shipping insurance at reasonable rates rather than insurance rates responding to the real risks. I mean, if there's a good chance that you might hit a mine or there's a good chance that you're going to get shot at, then insurance rates are going to go through the roof. I mean, it's understandable. So it says, oh, well, we'll subsidize you. We'll have normal insurance. Well, somebody's going to have to pay for that. And then it says, by ignoring the market risk, it's the taxpayers are going to subsidize the oil industry. But in fact, Trump issued a truth, I think, earlier today, commenting on the high oil prices. And he says, well, nothing to worry about these oil prices because, well, that means our oil companies are going to make a lot of money. Well, that's possible. Yeah, the oil companies are going to make a lot of money. But the oil consumers are not going to make money because the oil consumers are going to have to pay a hell of a lot more for their gas. And so it's just fascinating, this populist declaring, well, it's great, we're going to make a lot of money. Who's going to make a lot of money? The oil giants. So as the president, you're supposed to be the president of everybody. All of the people. The average people who don't make a lot of money, particularly, and that's particularly the case. I mean, all presidents have to be presidents of everybody, but particularly if you're a populist and your constituency are people who don't have very much money. And now you said, oh, it's great, we're going to make money. The oil companies are going to make money. But the average person who needs to fill up his tank, he's not going to make money. He's going to be paying 3-4 times what he was paying for gas before. So it's just amazing the stuff that he comes up with. So you're right, rewarding corporate interests while exposing the public to losses. Yeah, that's exactly right. And if these oil prices continue to rise, and if the risks of going through the Strait of Hormuz go to rise, then the subsidies would have to grow. I don't think Trump can actually do this. I mean, he can propose it, but there's no way Congress is going to adopt this. The Congress isn't going to provide subsidies to essentially to the insurance companies. He can't appropriate funds. The Democrats aren't going to go for it. So there's no way that this can work. And so I think this is just pie in the sky that he's going to provide affordable insurance. So I think it's just it's just not on. But his blasé attitude towards the ships going through the Straits of Hormuz, hey, don't worry about a thing. Don't worry about getting shot at. Just go for it. He's a little like Lady Lindsay. Just go do it. You first. So yeah. But again, this is somebody who himself has kind of avoided risks throughout his life. Like he avoided doing military service when he was eligible to do military service. Anyway, thank you so much, Cynthia. And Real Peter Nolan, good to see you again. Says millions of men under arms. What about all the stunning and brave women? Yeah, I think that these days you can't do conscription and limit it to men. I think you have to do the women now. that all the women are going to, the women presumably would have to volunteer to be in combat. I mean, I think there would be um, conscripted, but I think women would probably be given a choice. I mean, if you want to be in combat, sure, we can send you into combat, but there's lots and lots of things that you can do behind the lines and avoid combat. But yeah, conscription these days would have to be both men and women. Anyway, thank you. And then Robert, good to see you, Robert. Thank you so much for your generosity. And Robert says, Professor Morandi says talk of agreements is pointless. The issue is simple. Either the United States shut down its military bases in the Middle East and withdraws, or the war continues. In his view, there's no diplomatic middle ground, only exit or endless conflict. Well, I think that's right. I think Iran would probably make a lot of demands. I'm not sure Iran is going to make that demand that they close down the bases. I mean, it might. I mean, it might be an opening gambit in any behind the behind the scenes conversations, but I don't think the United States is likely to do that. I think much more likely is Iran demanding that the lifting of sanctions and the unfreezing of its assets. I think those are more attainable. And then Trump could somehow say, hey, we've got a working partnership, and there would have to be some guarantees issued by the United States that it's not going to attack Iran again. I mean, Israel isn't going to do it, but Iran could probably deal with that problem, because Iran could say, okay, if Israel is on its own and the United States basically says we're not going to go in ever again on behalf of Israel, Iran could probably live with that, because Iran can take on Israel. Iran has shown that it can take on Israel, but Iran can't really take on the United States. So if there was some kind of a non-aggression agreement between Iran and the United States, and the lifting of sanctions and the unfreezing of assets, I think then Iran would probably bring it to an end. Other than that, just simply, hey, we're just gonna declare victory and go home. That isn't gonna fly. I mean, that's just that's silly. So, but I can see Iran demanding the closure of military bases, but that isn't going to happen. I think it's just that's an unrealistic demand. But I think, as I say, sanctions, unfreezing of assets, some kind of an agreement, essentially security guarantees. Iran would demand security guarantees from the United States, which is you won't attack again. For what that's worth, for what a promise like that is worth. But that's the best Iran can do, because Russia and China, they're not going to come in. They're not going to issue security guarantees for Iran. I mean, that's not going to happen. It's like, I mean, it's just like a sort of symmetry between Ukraine, United States, and Ukraine. Russia and China are not going to do a NATO for Ukraine. Even NATO is not going to do it for Ukraine. So here is our friend, Marty always introduces himself with a great picture. And here is this picture with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, who is looking at empty glasses in front of him. Well, this look very interesting. And these glasses have, I may be mistaken, but at least in this picture, look like twists of lime in them, which makes it interesting. What were they drinking before? And there's some drinks in the ice bucket. I'm not sure what they. I hope there's some alcoholic beverages in the ice bucket. But Rutte in that picture, it's a great picture, seems to be pointing towards something. He wants to drink something. I don't know where this picture was taken, but Rutte seems to be quite preoccupied with getting a drink. So, anyways, Marty always comes up with some great photographs. Thank you for that. Thank you, Marty. The dogs appreciate um, appreciate your generosity, and even if they don't, I express their appreciation on their behalf. So thank you, Marty. And then Stone River says Marty shows no mercy, and that's exactly right. It says it's on the slate NATO. So this is NATO. I am sure they have good drinks at these NATO get-togethers. I'm sure they have great drinks at the various EU foreign ministers or EU defense ministers get-togethers and the G7s and the Munich Security Conference. I'm sure they have good scotches laid on. Uh, and thank you. And there's the picture from Marty with Zelensky extending his hand, and Orban looking at his hand, and the expression on his face is, well, I just don't know where that hand has been. And given Zelensky's kind of habits, it's a reasonable to wonder where that hand has been. So, I mean, Orban doesn't look like he wants to shake that hand. That's just, that's so. But as I say, he's got other things on his mind right now. I mean, I think he has every reason to think that there are people who want to kill him. I mean, I think it's reasonable that there's a price on his head right now. I think, given some of the psychotics around Zelensky. So anyway, thank you so much, Marty. And then Anne Marie, thank you as always for your generosity. Thank you, Anne Marie, for all of your fascinating contributions on music, on your experience of playing music at the highest international levels, playing music with some of the best conductors and composers and orchestras in the world. And so we learn so much from you, and we derive so much benefit from your musical knowledge, and when you express your aesthetic judgments on the music that we post here. I think we just learn so much from you, and so I'm really very appreciative of it, and of course appreciative of your continuing generosity. So thank you so much, Anne Marie. And you mentioned, Anne Marie, the other day about Sheila Fitzpatrick, and in fact, after your comment, I wrote to Sheila Fitzpatrick and inquired as to, I think it's time for another performance on the Gaggle. I haven't heard from her yet, but that was only a few hours ago. So I hope that we'll soon have Sheila on again. That was a lot of fun last time, and I think she's well worth well worth waiting for. So anyway, thank you so much, Anne Marie. Looking forward to more of your very learned comments on music, and my time has expired. Well, it expired a while ago, but thank you so much, everybody who joined the Gaggle. Really, thank you for your generosity. Those who contributed to the tip jar. I as I say, I have to express gratitude of the dogs, even though the dogs say, hey, you don't speak for us. We speak for us. You don't. But nonetheless, I feel I need to say thank you on behalf of the dogs. Thank you for your generosity. We're going to do some more podcasts over the weekend, and then next Monday we're going to do the joint live stream with Peter, and then on Tuesday we're going to do the another solo live stream with me and the dogs who are kind of in the background hovering. So thank you so much, everybody, for today, and Look forward to seeing you very soon. All the best. Good night. Bye bye.